Cool. So since we will probably have people coming in and leaving, I will maybe write in the chat or somewhere. Oh no, we can use the Miro board just for the setup of the conditions. So my idea was like, we have a fictional city of 6,000 people. This city is based somewhere in Europe, in European Union, right? I don't think we need to go too much into the laws of, whatever. But let's say the city is consisted of diverse nationalities, diverse races, diverse ages. It's like a small area where we have like private businesses and we have like, let's say, some agricultural goods, right? And it's in a democratic European modern state. And four of us are in a bar, and we decided, okay, like if we wanted to experiment creating a DAO of this city, where like the end goal would be that the DAO runs the city, how would we start? Like, what would we do? So I would say, as a guy, in having a fifth beer in a bar, I would say, yeah, let's try it out, and let's say, we should probably make some kind of a written document where we kind of agree on our values, on how we want to do it and how we want to operate, right? And then I would ask input from you.
Although if it's the fifth beer, we're probably more like, no, guys, totally. I got this great idea. We should totally go to government.
Yeah. It would be something like that. Yes, definitely. And ordering the sixth beer.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Steven. You have the most experience with.
No, I have the experience how not to do it. So what's the first thing we should think about, Filip, do you think? Is that the question? The first thing we should think about? Or we're in the bar and we have this crazy idea. And so what's the first thing?
You're asking this question.
I'm asking the question. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for me, it would be, when does it start? At what age? And what is the mental capacity of the person who is being onboarded?
I think for just the legality's sake, I think we can only we cannot accept minors. So I would say.
But then, if you want to create a true DAO that actually captures, the value of creating, a decentralized economy that includes children, includes even old people, you can say, well, there's no minors, but there's, 80-year-olds who are losing their mind.
Who are losing their mind? 80-year-old. Okay.
Yeah. Dementia.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say not take minors because that's just how my brain connects to the traditional system. But I guess you're right. There is no real reason not to take in people. Okay, not 8-9-year-olds, but maybe high schoolers or something like that.
Well, I mean, someone who's 8 is allowed to ride on the street with a bicycle, and you can kill someone with the bicycle.
Okay, but you would honestly have an 8-year-old come to a meeting and suggest something?
No, I'm like, in this meeting that we're here now, right? I wouldn't say that, we need to invite an 8-year-old, but, that's actually a topic that I want to discuss later on in the DAO. But, to some extent, the DAO needs to be simple enough, right? Simple enough that it can be introduced to a child, and, simple enough to someone who isn't entirely, of full mind, someone who's in his 80s, 70s, still having to grapple with the system. So it can't be sufficient, it has to be it has to be simple. That's what I would say. It has to be simple.
Okay, that's cool.
What does that simplicity imply?
It has to be concepts that you're familiar with already. It's nothing that's too foreign from you. I mean, you know, I have ideas on DAOs, and you know, very much it sounds very boring, but it's like you know, it's idea creation. It's a job profile, like an advanced job profile that like you have qualities on abilities, and then project management from there. You know, those are simple concepts that we all understand, you know.
Okay, but like if that would be like what I would say the higher, that's now a hierarchical, should we have a hierarchy, right? Because you want to make it simple so people with relative, you know, with small interest, they can have a vote, right? So it has to be in some way fundamentally democratic, right? But then you have to find a place for people who are willing to participate in a more active way to have that place, right?
And do you think that everyone should have an equal vote? I mean, say for example, the evolution of this DAO, right? I am someone who sits here who has a laptop, who's been programming for 10 years. Do you think that my gardener deserves the same sort of say on how the DAO should evolve when he has no experience with technology?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily that being a programmer, and this comes from a place that I'm a programmer myself, the programming skills doesn't necessarily make you more competent in making societal decisions, right?
I agree.
Should a programmer be allowed and appreciated and paid and, you know, incentivized to develop the technology for a DAO? Definitely, you know, Gardner can do that, right? But should people have the same like weight of vote? I think not. I think not. That's why we need, besides the basic democratic layer, like besides the minimum, like everybody gets one vote, right? You can only have more than one, but you can never have less than one, right? That's my opinion. Pete.
Well, I think also we need to have some way to deal with, because like, what if your gardener does know how to code? Like maybe you just don't know this about your gardener, but your gardener actually codes on the side, or maybe has a side business and is actually really, really good. You know, and just gardens on the side to make some money while, you know, pursuing his you know, his hustle. So you know,
No, I agree with you. So
yeah,
you know, I think that a very important thing is actually some measure of the quality of your ability. You know, like even you were saying, Philip, right? Is just being a programmer doesn't mean that I am the, you know, I'm necessarily the right person to discuss a DAO, right? But you know, my profile, if you could say, my LinkedIn profile gives me in the current world some sort of validity, right? As opposed to a gardener who doesn't. Now, the thing is that we need to change that such that, you know, you can say, well, you know how to design software, but you actually don't know how to construct, you know, you had not had experience prior to this in, for example, managing a lot of people. Say I didn't have that experience. But say, for example, my gardener did, and now he was just interested in gardening at the moment. And yet he had some pre-qualification, and it's kind of merit-based. It's not that you dictate, you say, okay, I know this. And it's not even that you say, okay, I've been educated in this. It's that you've actually gone out in the world, done it, and then been rated, and that's an immutable record of your ability.
I agree with you completely. That's like in the ideal world, we have an immutable record of your ability, right? But in the world that we are living in now, we don't have that. Like even if you're a programmer, I can say that I wrote your software and there is no real immutable way to prove that I didn't, right? But like on a simple level, I would suggest, right? You're a programmer, you can do the technical part, but like, can we get a politician here? Can we get the sociologist inside of this circle? Maybe they will help us with the part that we know nothing about. Can we get a lawyer? Can we get, you know, that's something that I would suggest. Please also, I'm sorry, when you want to say something, please just, you have reactions, raise hand. Otherwise, I'm just gonna speak all the time and no one wants that.
And also I'm feeling the need to go devil's advocate with a few other things too, which is that I've worked with programmers who have been programming for 10 years and don't know shit. sorry for the language there, but it can get very frustrating with people who don't know what they don't know, and they think they know a whole bunch of things, and then put their opinions in on a small framework that they only know one real part of this stuff, and they don't understand the rest of it.
So technical capability doesn't necessarily mean governance capability.
It also doesn't necessarily mean technical capability. I mean, just this seniority. I've been here for 10 years doesn't mean I'm good at what I'm doing.
Yes.
How do you test what you're good at?
Stephen, I apologize. Len has his hand up. So.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Sorry.
Hi, guys. So I missed the first part of this, struggling to get in. I put in chat a link from Harvard Law School panel discussion I just found this evening. I don't know when it was put out, that includes Antonopoulos, Emir Gum from Avalanche, and 2 lawyers. And part of it they were discussing, I mean, it was about DeFi, but part of it they were discussing DAOs. And Antonopoulos made a point that I thought relates to your situation. Am I on or are you on, Stephen?
You're on.
Stephen, am I? Yeah, they're related to your situation. I watched your video, Rick, and the 4 guys. Is that the Antonopoulos's point was a DAO is meant.
You are cutting off.
Len, it seems you have some connection issues.
Okay, I don't know. You hear?
Not really.
It's an interesting link.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely will. Yeah, now it's a little bit better. Can you try again, Len?
Yeah, I think the point was that Antonopoulos was making is that a DAO is managed by a community, not by a committee. And I think, Stephen, you faced this situation. Rick, when he was talking, kept referring to community, and really community was 8 persons. And I don't know that was 8 persons after you guys left or 8 persons before you left, but that's not a community. And I think that in all that's going on in the Discord server, there's a lot of talk about majority. Majority of 3 people or 5 people who are participating in a particular discussion. I think that, I mean, it's not, you can't go from 0 to community in 1 step. That's fair enough. And the other thing that they talked about is that the first step, which apparently the organization that Rich set up, is that you have to have Antonopoulos said, a programmable constitution. Never mind programmable, at least constitution. And I think at the time that you were talking, Stephen, there was no constitution, that was kind of like left as a to be done. But in fact, should have been the very, very first thing that was done when you're talking. So if you don't have community, at least have, I mean, if it takes a while to build community, at least start with a constitution.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's great input and a great summary there. Picked up on, from the start of NFT DAO, I tried to push for a charter and a code of conduct as complete prerequisites. I mean, you can call it what you want, but a charter is just going to be a basic. You could even just have it as a mission statement or a statement of intent. What do you intend to do? Who are you? And then the other thing is a code of conduct is the other thing I would say is essential at the beginning. And that's how people behave and how people respect each other. And that also leads into who they think each other are. I agree with you about community. I would say community should be a reserved word. It shouldn't be a word that you can disuse. It's a word that you need to earn. So if you're a small group of people, you're a committee. You're not a community until you have lived a community. That's the point about programmable constitutions. They are challenging to build.
Right, but I think that we can agree. I think that can be like the first thing that was agreed here. That I saw that when Len, you mentioned constitution or some kind of document, everybody kind of started, like Anthony, Stephen, Pete, we were all like, okay, that's a good idea, right? Do we have do we have consensus about that?
Sure, I think
Yeah, I mean,
when you start a company, the first thing you have to do when you start a company is create articles of association. Even before that, you have to have shareholders agreement. And the shareholders agreement says that things like if I die, who gets my shares? Or if I want to sell my shares, blah, 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 or we want to put more capital. So the foundational document is a shareholders agreement. And that's not necessarily appropriate here. But the second is an articles of association, which is, like Stephen said, charter, constitution, or whatever. And the third step would, as you mentioned, Philip, it's programmable rules or whatever. But I think the issue should be those are the steps that are addressed and thought about.
Great. Pete, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I think it's good to have sort of an intention or a how we plan to work together, those sort of instantiation kinds of things. Although one of the things that I discovered in working with startups, which I did about a decade ago, was that many times the idea of what that would be was unknown, or maybe they had a really clear idea as the startup started, and then they got into it and they discovered what was going on, and they started, refining things, and people dropped out, but they were still written into the constitution of that beginning entity. And so one of the things that we started recommending as coaches for the startup community I was in was holding off on defining those things for a little while. That there's a lot of upfront stuff that needs to be figured out, that needs to be, customer discovery, figure out what your real company is going to be, because the company that launches is never the company that the founders thought it was going to be. And once they find out what it really is, then all of a sudden a whole bunch of people are not interested anymore. And setting your divisions of stake or shares in the company at the early stages got people into a whole lot of trouble. And I know we're not doing shares here, but the same thing as far as order, understanding what you need first and putting the constitution a little bit later, I think is worthy of thought.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do a constitution until you've discussed it and considering it, and it's not a document that you write or produce without discussion or consideration. And you also, the point is to recognize that there will be change, and you have mechanisms for changes. I think, Stephen, in your case, I don't know because I didn't follow exactly, but there were issues about who gets paid when the money comes in, who gets it. That's like a standard thing in this circumstance. So yes, Pete, is that it doesn't necessarily start off with the final document, but still should, the formation of any organization is based on that shareholders agreement. And in this case, let's say members of the DAO, if you want to call it not shareholders, and then the arms of each other, and this discussion.
Thank you, Len. Anthony, please continue.
So, Pete, obviously that's considering a company, right? And the scope of the objectives are unknown, right? What we're all working towards. Whereas I think in this particular scenario, I think that we can pretty much all agree to some extent that we're trying to, build a community with democratic habits, right? So it's not a situation where we have any sort of, and I don't want to say that I want to exclude myself from putting a hierarchy into the system, but certainly that middlemen are not needed, where hierarchies are needed where needed. And this is the topic I actually want to discuss with DAO, because I also realized the same thing, was that you actually can't have a DAO until you kind of discuss some fundamental framework for how the participants of that need to behave with each other, okay? And that was actually, I posted a link in the Discord, and I think that the democratic habits are born out of the thing what they call the golden rule, which is what all religions have. which is don't treat others how you would not like to be treated. And I think there's something in that where we can draw a constitution that basically dictates how we should act, you know, how responsible we should be within our environment, and then to some extent how we need to engage others and how we expect them to behave. And if they're doing something that is unjust, how we must take action basically to prevent that from continuing.
Sure, Anthony, I think you're correct. And it's just a question of devoting the effort to sit down and do that at the very beginning, at the first step. It doesn't have to be the final product. It's just kind of like principles. You're talking about fundamental principles. The point was, Stephen, you I guess were in the NFT DAO organization from the beginning. Yes, no?
No, I wasn't actually. I joined just a month before they. Thanks for that question. A month before they got funded in March, but I think they formed around January, I think, and they started putting themselves together towards the end of January, beginning of February, and I joined about a month later than that. So.
Okay, the point I was going to ask about or make is that. And it's not necessarily so appropriate to talk about Rich Kopko while he's not here.
No.
So I'm going to.
If we could talk in generalities, maybe about.
Well,
Can I just?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt for a second. The room's name is NFT DAO, which is a mistake. The whole subject is not NFT DAO, right? No. And the subject is that we are having a thought experiment where, like, we have a fictional city of 6,000 people. And we're gathered in this room and we're starting to ideate about building a DAO for that city, right? I said it in the beginning, Len, maybe you weren't here. I'm not.
I wasn't there yet. Okay, and so that's the point. There is some benefit from using this attempt to create NFT DAO, as in NFT-DAO, and its successes or failures. And I think that, yeah, if you want to use the example, we're talking about that there should be some kind of formative principles created, but also not necessarily a rush to, it's not like a gold rush. And what I watched that happen there is that it came up that there was an NFT idea. And all of a sudden there were 10 NFT proposals, and there was a gold rush to bring them all in together, and it became too unwieldy to do that. So yes, going back to your point, Philip, is that in a generic situation, I think what we're talking about, it still makes sense that you have to have some organizing framework, some principles, as Pete said. Anthony, as you said, some goals. I think that's just sensible.
Great. So I think we can start with that, right? I think that's something that we can all agree on. We need organizing principles. We need goals, right? So can someone suggest, let's say, an organizing principle or a goal that can be put into the initial version of our code of conduct, whatever it is?
I think Anthony said it quite correctly. If Anthony, you want to repeat what you said about the guiding principle of this DAO?
Well, I mean, look, the thing is that, the thing is that I'm also thinking of a DAO that potentially can be reused in multiple different structures of organizations, right? So the organizations, it can be a DAO created amongst children at a school, just as much as it can be used in a business. So, the guiding principles that I would recommend are ones that kind of establish the democratic responsibilities, because I don't think that you should talk about democratic rights without realizing there's responsibilities that you need to fulfill in order to satisfy the rights for others. And it's an interesting conversation. It's basically where I started, because I have my own project, where I'm kind of picking pieces. But certainly, like I said, I'll always come back to the golden rule. There's something in amongst, not bringing suffering onto others that you yourself can understand. As like a smart contract, there is definitely something in there which then allows us to self-organize. And it's quite interesting because, you know, there was, I forget who said it, but they said, even if you're a selfish person and you think only about yourself, there's yourself today, and there's yourself tomorrow, and there's yourself in a year. So you're actually a community in amongst yourself. And if you also use that guiding principle, you'll see that your behaviors, you know, start to align with the community to some extent, that you don't harm your future self, you don't harm, you know, the people around you, at the very least, you know. So you can be, for example, not a positive gain to the world, but certainly you shouldn't impact on the people around you. So, you know, that would then be my minimal framework for then saying, from there, we can start to discuss things. And again, this has to be simple enough. And I've always, you know, I said this at the beginning of the talk, I don't think you were here. It has to be simple enough that children can grasp onto it and they can take that and make their own DAO.
Okay, thank you. So I would say that we can add that into our document as a guiding principle, right? Do not do to others what you would not like others to do to you. Do not bring harm at the minimum level. Do not bring harm.
I want to say something counterfactual to that, if I may.
Just Stephen, please. Danny raised his hand.
Oh, sorry, Danny.
Just for the sake of the argument, now I understand like where this comes from, right? Everybody would like to be treated the way, like, you know, like it makes sense, but that also assumes that you have same values as other people around you. So what happens in a way that, let's say, people vary in a way they'd like to be treated, right? And then you end up having discrepancy about like, how do you find that the middle ground for people to agree on? Just for the sake of the argument now, as I was listening to it.
Danny, I think the point is that's a fundamental principle. It's not necessarily the whole story, that there's more to it than that, but it's let's say a decent principle. In my business experience, I've done, let's say, a number of businesses. One of the things that I learned, that organizing, let's say a partnership where you have a couple of people, 2, 3, 4 people, the least wise basis is fair. Because what I learned, and as Danny was saying, is somebody else has a different perception of fair. So if you just use fair, be careful.
I think actually, I mean, Daniel, I'm glad Daniel said that, because it's actually very similar to what I was going to say. Because I was actually going to say a counterfactual. And the counterfactual was, I think there needs to be a pre-formation stage where you, and I think Catalyst did something like this, where essentially you have some chaos, if you like. And what is that stage for? It's to discover who you are, where you come from, and what your cultures are, and what your values are. Those things aren't, if you just try and define them, you will live to that definition. You won't be who you are. You know, humans have different cultures, different values, different religions, different countries, very different. You could argue they have some commonalities, but to stretch that argument too far is to be presumptuous. You know, you can't impose the same system on every single culture. You know, so I would agree with Daniel on that. There needs to be a pre-formation stage somehow where you discover your values.
Yeah, but I think that you start, though, to some extent with that principle, and then from there you say, well, I would like to be understood. For example, like, you know, if I move into a different culture, that my culture is understood at least within the environment, then I take the time to understand their culture. So it's from the principle that then is born out of that mechanisms, and what you're talking about is culture and stuff. It's the differences, it's actually the semantic differences between what I think and what you think, and how that must be translated, you know, such that I understand your suffering. Because, I mean, for example, we could not know that trees are suffering at all times, you know, and we're cutting it down. You know, there's no communication between us. So, you know, it is a good starting point. And I can't think of something. You know, if you go from all the other mechanisms, you'll always circle back to something like this.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
guys,
that
just one moment. Can I just please call for, when you want to talk, please just raise your hand. Pete is holding his hand up for 5 minutes already. Do we know how to do that? like there are reactions on the bottom right, and yeah, that's it. Pete, go ahead, please.
I mainly wanted to call out and make sure that there was that we're on the same page with what Anthony said. He had sent me an article like previous to this that I felt really well captured the golden rule, but there's many different ways of saying it. And one of the ways of saying it is the positive, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But there's another way to say it, which is do not do unto others as you would not want them to do unto you. And what I hear Anthony putting forward is the negative version of that. It's not really negative, but like using the don't do unto others as you would not want it done unto you. And I think that's a different proposition than do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because that gives a difference that allows for these differences in approach and background and culture and all these kinds of things. So I just want to make sure that we're all talking about that negative version of the statement, not the positive version of the statement.
Len, go ahead, please. You're muted.
Going back to Danny's, what he implied, look at the list of people who are here, and look at the list of people who are basically active on Discord or Telegram, and we have sort of Western Europeans and North Americans, North and South Americans, and I think that in terms of designing governance, of which DAO is an important part of governance. One of the things that we're kind of like ignoring is that not only there's going to be socially and cultural differences, but this community is going to expand, hopefully, if the IOG plan works. It's going to expand, let's say, over the next 2 or 3 years, significantly to Africa, and it's already in Asia. And we kind of only have a Western viewpoint of everything, and it's difficult for us to incorporate that. But I think we have to somehow.
Yeah, and we also said that in our city we are like racially and nationally diverse. So we have in our fictive city, we have the same predicament, let's say. So I would say, as a suggestion, how about we can say we in our city we try to reach those communities, and we tell them about our idea of how we would like to have a DAO on the city level, right? If you transfer that to Cardano, that would mean like go speak with each of the communities and tell them, hey, do you have some kind of your DAO? Do you have your values? Do you have something that you can do? And if you can set up a structure within yourselves, then that can teach us how to set up ours, etc., right? Anthony, please.
Yeah, so just to, obviously, what you just said was about what I was going to lead on to was, there has to be some base principle, but the thing is that with the DAO that we're creating is actually more of a tool chain to allow people to create their DAOs, and it should be very simple. Like I said, lots of people, they like to think about adults in these scenarios, but I actually try to pull the examples in dimensions that they haven't thought about. Like, what if there was, a community that you couldn't communicate with, what about children, or, what about people who are all in their 80s and they're going a bit dotty, right? So the more that you throw it out there. Now, the thing is that when you look at those communities, if you go into, for example, an old age village, you'll see that there is a hierarchy where there's kind of the nurses and basically, but there's one nurse per kind of old person. So the old person follows this nurse, but not necessarily the others, but kind of does the others, so there is a social structure there that you need to be able to very quickly evolve and adapt to that particular community, So, certainly, we could take an example of a town, which is kind of in the thing. And this is something, not to kind of derail this discussion, because I actually, next week want to talk about, we can talk about it for the rest of the session, if you would like, to actually the kind of constitution. But certainly this week, I was kind of hoping that we could take an example and really break down some use cases that are like, oh, look about this, you know, what about this problem, or what about that problem? Like I mentioned with the children and the old people, it's problems, right? Those are the use cases that we need to, you know, we need to challenge ourselves with to answer. Yeah.
Len? You're muted.
Yeah, I think that Anthony, you're right in giving those examples. There are plenty of examples. So we start someplace, doesn't matter where we start, children or old people. But I think that, Philip, what you kind of were alluding to, and I'm sorry I missed the front part of this, a 6,000 member community of multiracial, multicultural. I think the contribution that we or others here could make is to try to formulate that fundamental document that that applies, and it has to be fundamental, that can be used by a broad range of communities, children and old people or whatever, and Japanese people or whatever, or people from Nigeria, but some kind of fundamental precepts that if you get that right, it's kind of like if you just get that part right, go do, but get this part right. I think that would probably be the greatest contribution to this discussion of DAOs.
So would you suggest like this document to be so fundamental that can be just copied and used in a whatever, let's say, community, whatever age, whatever culture, assuming they understand the language of the document, but like, or do we want to make a document with changeable values, right? Because do we put values in the document? Because if we put values, then if I give it to a tribe in Africa, maybe their values are totally different. They don't give a, you know, a rat's ass about my values.
So I think it should be fundamental to some extent. You know, I like I said, I think that children are actually born with democratic habits. You know, if you leave two children to each other, to their own devices, it's actually, I mean, there was a study someone mentioned about how rats play, and if you have like one rat that's significantly larger than the others, as in like it would always win if it came to a fight, and it doesn't let the smaller one win, then the small one just stops playing, right? So you know, it's not something that's kind of unique to humans, is that, you know, there's mechanisms by which we do play and exercise our abilities and try to find space for the others around us, right? And this is something that is almost biological. And, you know, just to that point though, something fundamental, and you know, this is one thing which I think lots of people, when I say this to them, they kind of, it shocks them, but we're not democratic. You know, you and me, we're not actually democratic, because you live, you know, in a European country and I live in an African country. So the rights afforded to me and the rights afforded to you are different. So we're not democratic, you and me. And the very same institutions that we hold to basically maintain democracy are actually the very same institutions that divide us. They're the very same institutions that divide us. Countries divide us democratically. So, you know, what I kind of think, so, you know, in terms of some fundamental document, and, you know, and it, to some extent, it does kind of, you know, that's why I like it being born out of a religious sentiment, you know, the golden rule, is because it seems to apply even to the communists, right? Is treat others, you know, don't treat others how you would not want to be treated. So, you know, and that I agree with Len there, is if we could actually genuinely create a digital identity and say, here is a 2-sentence structure that basically dictates my responsibilities as a democratic citizen to afford the rights to everyone else around me to some extent. I mean, you know, maybe it can be a paragraph, but this being the first thing, you know, the very first responsibility is actually to let the guy next to you know that you're equal in some democratic sense. That's what I think, you know. So that calls to kind of education, and it calls to some sort of semantic differences, right? Is that I know this and you don't. There's a hierarchy there already, and I'm thinking about, you know, children who don't know this yet. You know, they do biologically, but they actually aren't. They don't understand that they have some sort of legal grounding, you know, by actually being a democratic citizen. So yeah, I mean, I think we can do it. I think that it's biologically valid, you know. So at the very least, I think we can solidify some principles.
Len, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the issue is, yeah, there's kind of like social mores that fit into this. But also there's the issue of the technology and the blockchain environment. And that's not something that everybody starts off knowing about. So I think that there's yes, at a basal level, you can say the 10 Commandments or the equivalent is in Islam or in Buddhism, the precepts, you can start there. But I think what we're talking about is it can't stop there because we're talking about a technology and a what we've learned through our limited experience and research. I think a lot of us read a lot. Is I think that we have to layer on top of that the concept of a DAO in terms of blockchain. So it's not just the fundamental human factors.
I agree with you. I agree with you, and it's just that if we go into the blockchain debate, I think that's a little bit more down the line. If this is our first meeting, I don't know how useful it would be to say, okay, you know, how many tokens are we going to mint, or how are we going to sign the transactions, or things like that, right?
No, excuse me, I'm sorry. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the concept of a DAO within the digital ledger technology environment. It's not something that children or old people necessarily know about. So in terms of formulating this fundamental, not rules, but the fundamental precepts, I think we have to go beyond just social mores and to talk about what we've observed and what we learned didn't work. And to give, let's say, principles.
Pete, please, and then Tivo, sorry.
All right. I find myself intrigued and also thinking about hypotheses. So like, I'm intrigued by this idea that Anthony's putting forward that if it's simple enough that kids can do it, that maybe that's going to result in a better system. My hypothesis, my experience is that some of the simpler systems are more easily and quickly abused by people who have more experience. But I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case. And so I feel like a desire to sort of like run some test cases on these things and like try one model and then see if we can hack it and break it apart. Try another model, see if we can hack that and break it apart and see which ones do stand up under pressure.
Thank you, Pete. Tivo?
I will share the screen, but I will take it back what Pete said at the start of the call, or when I was around, how to measure how good you are at what you do, because it's somehow we kind of realize that the merit is a good way to track your ability to operate in the DAO where we align in a good incentive and going forward. And if we could, and then back to this story where like how to teach to the children, and I don't know, even to us, the best ability is to, when we take action and when we see results right away, that's the most awesome thing we could do. So if you could, Filip, host, give me co-host or share the screen of the Miro board, I could a bit show what I was brainstorming out there and see if we could break this system or like give risks.
I would love to give you co-host, but I don't know how.
Only Felix can do it then. But then
Felix, can you give co-host to Tivo, please?
Only in the main room.
Okay, then give me a moment. I'll open the Miro and then share my screen. Hold on. Where are the balls?
But I already start with that. So what I did was I created like a ranking system. So I gave everybody of you a name and assumed like a rank for you. And I created the role. So I didn't, there is a couple of ways to address it. You all mentioned like what action you do, but I was like making it a higher level, what role you have. So on the role you can have like a lot of things you can do. So basically my goal was to bring it to the higher level. So let's say I'm a lawyer, I am a new person, I created some documents, I helped one client, and you all know with Filip, Pete, Steph, all the upper there are the names of the people who already have the ranking of being a lawyer given by each of you. Then when you vote, then that will give you like the ranking of me. So, but the way has to be some kind of algorithm, because I was thinking, but I don't know, is it a good question, like a good idea? So in the red ones, and these are the questions like how to break it. So should the rank 9 have 100% like voting power to rank? Okay, we have to maybe revert it. But basically, if you have rank 9, like we have Steven here, and if he votes on me and says, hey, my score is 4, and then Filip comes with his rank 7, then the middle value of and both of you, like let's say Filip gives 8 and Stefan gives 7, then it's going to be 7 point something, because Stefan has like a higher ranking to assess my the ability. And below there, I wrote this like a mesh, like because everybody doesn't vote for everything. Because if you're gonna have like thousands of lawyers, you don't want to go like, okay, every time new person comes, I'm gonna vote for him. So you only look around yourself and like give your opinion of ranking for them. But eventually it is creating like a big mesh, and you have like weak links and strong links, and everybody has their own rankings. So I feel like it could create like a liquid ranking system. And with the yellow nodes, I put up some like kind of like limits, like you cannot have like one person can vote for you, but if it doesn't have rank 9, which is a maximum, then it won't activate on you, because we don't want to somebody who just comes in, has like low ranking, and keep giving his friends like rank 9 and like taking whole network on their own.
Okay, Tivo. So first we have Len, then we have Pete, then we have Anthony.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting and good to diagram like this to kind of like set out a possible, let's say, framework. But 2 observations. 1, a lot of overhead in doing this. And 2, I don't know if algorithmically, I don't know that algorithms are necessarily the right solution. Maybe they are. But a lot of overhead. Maybe there's no choice.
What do you mean by a lot of overhead? Just like the overhead of ranking everybody around you?
Yeah, I mean the ranking and the operation of this, and who's going to do what and how it's going to be done. And somebody comes in new, how do they get a rank? I mean, just a lot of overhead. That's all.
Pete, please.
All right. This reminds me kind of as an allegory. During the US 2016 election, I ran a group where we were doing fact checking, and we were trying to figure out if we could come up with some sort of way to do an algorithm on fact checking. And it was kind of very similar that for every argument that was there was a bunch of different sources that said, yes, I agree with this. No, I don't agree with this. Or I like this, or I don't like this. And we actually got to a whole system where we could look at and say, all right, well, these people are saying yes, or these people are saying no, but how do I verify that these people are giving good feedback? Like this is a good way to sort of rate this person. And the only thing we could figure out when there was we basically were looking at news sources. And so we had to go back to verifiable news sources. So if we had a new issue that came onto the field, and we went and looked at like this newspaper or this, you know, blog or this TV show was saying, you know, it was in the pro, we could go back and we could say, of all the different things that they've said in the past, we could there are some things that were hard verifiable, like they said a thing and it was wrong, or they said a thing and it was right. And then there's a wide variety of things that were opinion, and you can't do a whole lot with opinion. And so it was really hard to sort of get down to a point that was acceptable, that was considered as legitimate by anybody else, to say that, yes, this, you know, this source, we should discount this source and not take their opinion as strongly, because they, you know, they've been verified as being false, or they've been verified as not caring about the truth, not doing the research, not really understanding the circumstances that are there. And it makes the whole scoring thing very, very subjective. And once it becomes subjective, the legitimacy is gone. So I love the direction that you're sort of going. And I wonder if there's a way to sort of find through it. But I see some of the things already, like I've already been able to test out, have huge, huge hackability.
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
So, I'm glad that Tiva, you actually came up with a solution, because this is exactly the implementation I have in my system. Except the rating system that I have, I call them qualities. So you have abilities, like for example, wash dishes. So that's a task that both me and you can do, right? But what I call a quality is then my particular ability to wash the dishes, right? So some rating, and obviously, you know, it needs to be people that have previously, you know, or have the right to know whether I've done a good job washing the dishes, right? So they have to have their own qualification to some extent to say, and that is actually education, right? If you know, washing dishes is a simple example, but you know, go all the way up into academic careers, the same mechanisms at play there. You have people that are at the forefront of knowledge, right? And they can easily determine whether someone doesn't know what they're talking about. Someone will jump into the field, and, you know, you'll go blah, blah, blah. And they'll be like, dude, you know, just sit back and maybe study for another 4 years, you know, and then, you know, propose a piece of paper, you know. And so to some extent, there is a pre-qualification, and that is education. There's actually the mechanisms, you know, that goes from I know this, as opposed to I approve of this, as opposed to I've decided to kind of implement this, to I have now implemented this. Like I now know this. And then furthermore to that I've been proven to know this. Like that, I think, is the evolution of your quality. And I said, I've kind of changed the word to semantically mean the quality of a particular ability of a person.
Thank you, Anthony. Len, please.
I think that the example of washing dishes is an easy example. When it gets down to expressing a political opinion, I think you're going to find that not so easy to discern who's an expert without bias, or who's an expert with bias, or who has this whatever. So washing dishes, the quality of yeah, you can wash dishes, I can wash dishes better. That's fine, but when you move up the food chain, I think that becomes more like what Pete was saying, is that at the end of the day, you know, a fact-checking mechanism is fine, but when you start to get into more and more subjectives, it's difficult, or it loses its credibility, or could lose its credibility. But let's bring this back down to a DAO. I think we're talking about starting off, because we really don't have anything going on right now. I think all models are kind of like okay and open to start with, and to experiment and see, as long as we keep open minds and we don't get rigid in that, well, we've created this this blue flag system, and so we just keep trying to modify the blue flag system. When we find a problem, we modify the blue flag system, as long as we don't get down that rabbit hole. I think it's good to experiment and see the difficulties are or how it works. And I'm sure it can evolve.
Thank you, Pete. Just before Pete, you start, I'm gonna put a cap at the next 10 minutes. And then I'm gonna ask all of you nicely if you want to move to Phil K's room, if we can maybe share some love for the IOG devs, if you'd like. But in any case, I will have to leave in after that, so we have another 10 minutes, okay?
All right. So I wanted to offer up a alternative thing that I think achieves the same goal, but is more robust. And so that actually is the scientific process itself. If you do a full scientific process, that includes nullable hypotheses, quality metrics, and then reinforces that with having it to be able to be reproduced by other people to be re-verified. Because even if you have this sort of system wherein you have the education, you have the knowledge, you're training people on how to do this, and that becomes the standard of measurement, and you've got people who've been doing this for a while, there still are holes. And so one of the gaps in there, for example, is in the science of weight loss and fat processing. And there was one of these things that we discovered. So with this history of the data and the science around it, that a lot of the research was being done in and around World War II. And over in the Western side, we were researching low-fat diets. And over in the Eastern Bloc, they were researching low-carb diets. Then the war came around. A lot of the doctors who were researching low carbs were Jewish, and a lot of them were killed during the war. And so the prevalence of data that we had coming out after the war was very highly low-fat centric. And when they went back later to finally look at this stuff, spurred on by people like Atkins, this is probably one of the more popular ones to get into this, but he fought the establishment, had to fight the establishment for such a long time just to get them to recognize that those original studies that were doing low-fat diets did not control for carbs. And when you went back through for the ones that had enough information and tried to re-pull all the data and look at them, you could actually show a higher correlation with low carbs than you could with low fat. And yet we had decades where the educated people, the educated establishment, like if you came up with this idea that high fat was a good diet, like you were laughed out of town. You could not get any funding. You could not get any support. So education enough is not enough of a hurdle to make sure that you have a robust system that allows the truth to come forward instead of just the more popular thing or the thing that is more well known.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Anthony?
Yeah, so I'll just expand on that point, is that you're exactly right. Basically, a quality can be reinforced. Like, the ability for me to, for example, to write a website, right, has improved, and I have proved it again and again and again, which refines the quality and solidifies, my ability, unless I start losing my memory, which is obviously something which, needs to be considered, that quality can degrade. But, that presumably most people, they have a quality, they learn it, they reinforce it through merit, and then they are measured against that. And, that then gives you a quality rating. And then the following quality ratings reinforce that, so it's not just, it's tested once, but it's tested every single time. It's not just, it's just, what I'm saying is that in real time, your qualities are tested in real time. There isn't ever a point at which you aren't rating the ability of someone to do something. And then I think to Len's point, you said washing the dishes is easy, but then, when it comes to politics is hard. And my immediate reaction, what percentage is hard? There are some subjective topics, but I would say that potentially those are in areas that we do need to discuss and refine, but there's 95 or 96% of the rest that you could kind of say, well, that's, you either can do it or you can't do it. There's a lot of things that people can get done. And certainly in terms of a DAO, if we could just say, like, look, that's the default, and then basically we should refine things with maybe a compassion, a compassionate leeway in the areas where that doesn't cover the base, the example, you know, the base algorithm. And you know, I really kind of question what, you know, how much of those difficult topics are, you know, in what percentage they are as part of the total sum of abilities that are out there.
Len, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that you don't have to go to the level of politics to look within our community to find that there's some very basic kind of low level, maybe a little bit higher than dishwashing, in which people have strong opinions on, let's say, radically different ends of the spectrum. The question is, among a small community, the issue is small, the size of the community. If the community is 3 or 5 or 6 people, who's making the assessment about the qualifications? I think, I mean, I can agree with you, Anthony, in terms of a broader community or a larger number of community where you have, let's say, a lot of interactions. But what we have in our, Cardano community is Discord servers and Telegram servers, but Discord servers particularly, where there's 3, 4, 5 people who dominate all of the discussion. And in that sense, you know, they determine quality. Telegram is a little bit broader. So I think the issue is, or the lesson is that there's, you know, whatever we do or whatever we might do with a DAO, you have the initial state, in which is always going to be a small community. Use the NFT DAO, 8 people, and then your end state is where you have 1,000 people, and the things that you set up for 8 people might not work so well, but you're aimed at the end state where there's 1,000 people.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Please, you will be the final one. Then I will have like a small just closing words, and then we'll go back to the main room.
Okay, I'll just say that models are fine, but they are always contextual. So in this case, I think we have our city, and then we might have a group of lawyers together, and that's fine to do a ranking like this. But we should be aware that the ranking, this is local, it's localized, and it's biased. I don't mean bias in a bad way. Every single value judgment is a bias. Let's say you take the example of the Atkins diet. That's a bias to saying that fat is good for you, and in a way it is. It biases you to saying this is healthy, okay? But it's still a bias, okay? So it's like, let's say our group of lawyers are deciding that they like something together. That's how they like to do things together. They are biased to that result, you know. So there's no truth here. You know, to actually presume truth is to presume something that doesn't really exist. It's just because you really are just choosing an evaluated outcome. So let's go back to my notes. So the model is a conjecture. The tests, any test of the model, the model is going to be contextual, and any results that come out of it are going to be contingent. You know, so, and I would also say that expertise doesn't imply truth here. But I mean, it may not matter because we're trying to achieve is rankings for a small group of lawyers in our city. So it may be fine to do that. And just as long as we don't think that we can apply this to the whole world, I would say.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. What I got out of this, you know, whole thing is that, of course, this is a huge subject and an ambitious, you know, subject to even discuss, right? And it's very difficult because for me, I'm always someone who prefers to have an output, who prefers to have something, you know, pen to paper at the end of something. Right. And I think that in the beginning, we went into a good way, and even having one guiding principle that we agree on, like do not do to others what you don't want someone to do to you. I think that's a big step, right? If we as an initial group of basically strangers can agree at least on one thing, I think that's a good thing. But we see that whatever subject we tackle, we have a lot of different opinions, right? And if we are, let's say, forced, let's say we have to do the DAO for any reason, we didn't even scratch the surface on how do we reach a collective decision that everybody respects, right? And that is, you know, it gets very difficult, right? And I love, Anthony, I can't wait for next week. You will have your room and I will be the guest, and I can't wait to be there. And hopefully we'll continue to explore this, because we all know that Cardano is going in that way, and we have to be ready, because like what happened with NFT DAO is, you know, it's a small scale, you know, incident, let's call it, and you know, life goes on. But if we mess this up on a huge scale, then we don't want to do that, right? So thank you for participating. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna stop